Hey everyone, today I'm talking with Matt Halpern. Matt and I created the first guest course on my website, jpbouvetmethod.com, and it went live a week ago. So the Creative Grooves of Matt Halpern is live right now on jpbouvetmethod.com. If you're not familiar with jpbouvetmethod.com, it is my website where I specialize in teaching improvisation and creativity with step-by-step approaches. So for all levels, people interested in all genres, we build vocabulary from a very simple starting place where you can establish a lot of control improvising with a small subset of vocabulary, and then we add complexity, right? This is the general method that we take. And the enormous value that is added by guest courses like Matt's as the first, and like there will be more coming soon, is we get to get in the head of some of our favorite drummers and think, how are people like Matt approaching the drums? How are you thinking about creativity? What's it like to be in your head as you're improvising? What types of thoughts are you having as you are guiding your playing through the blurry heat of improvisation? And other various things. So Matt's course gets into a lot of the nitty-gritty of what's going on with Matt. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that as we go. But for now, Matt, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Dude, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
How's your day going?
Good. Just sipping on some coffee and ready to talk to you.
Hell yeah. All right. And the other thing to mention for those of you who are interested in checking out Matt's course or interested in learning to improvise on the drums, we're doing a big sale right now to celebrate Matt's course and to celebrate the 4th of July. This is the biggest sale that I do. It's $100 off if you select annual billing, or since it's a choose your discounted venture, if you choose monthly billing, you get your first month free. So if you're new to the website, you want to check out Matt's course, snoop around, take a free month. There's no obligations beyond that. And if you like what you see and you want to dive in deeper and learn to flow effortlessly on the kit, go ahead and grab the annual billing mega discount, and I will email you as I do all students, and we'll start working and find you the right courses to get started with. So that's enough about me. That's enough about the website. Let's talk about this course. So Matt Halpern, here with us today, best known for being the drummer of the progressive metal band Periphery, but Matt does many other things as well, and he is also very well respected as an improvising drummer and has played at all sorts of drum festivals, at PASIC, and can sit down at the kit and make magic happen. And since improv and creativity is sort of at the center of my interests and in my heart as a drummer, only natural that Matt is the first guy to have on the site here. But also, Matt and I go back more than 10 years at this point. So Matt, give us a quick rundown of how we met and the trajectory of our drum friendship and regular friendship at this point.
Sure. We met at the Minimalism Drum Festival in Germany. Me, you, and Mike Johnston were the three American drummers that were invited to perform at that particular festival. So we bonded pretty quickly. I think we were all in the same vehicle together, going from the airport to the festival, if I recall correctly. And there was instant chemistry between the three of us, and we hit it off really well. And then following that festival, we all stayed in touch and decided that it would be a really good idea to kind of come together and create a clinic tour called the Common Thread Tour, where it was me, you, and Mike Johnston. And we did a bunch of legs of that tour all over the U.S., offering, education through the form of drum clinics to anyone who would want to come and watch us. And so with that, we had a chance to not only learn from each other night after night in a very focused setting, but we had a lot of time together on the road to talk, to eat together, to play, to drive, whatever we were doing. We were together for many, many hours. So we all formed a really strong friendship, and I think that's carried over beyond the years that we've all been doing our own thing. So yeah, I definitely consider you a good friend. I think there's a great foundation there that we've built because of the clinic tour and everything that we've been through together. And then a huge amount of respect as an educator. I think it's important to note that a lot of the concepts that I think about and have adopted in terms of improvisation on the drums come from different things that I had learned from you during those particular clinics that we did together. I've certainly tried to put my own signature to these ideas and think about them and apply them to what I do. But I think your insight and wisdom on this topic of creativity and improvisation has been very, very useful in my own development as an improvisational drummer. I've always done it, but I think you definitely helped to sort of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me mold it and carve it into something that's a little bit more focused. So I don't want to be redundant when I talk about some of this stuff, but I will say that if you are new to JP's website, I can't recommend learning these concepts from him enough, because I certainly took a ton away from working with JP and learning from him about these same things.
Oh man, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. The tour was so special because I feel like it was improv beyond even drumming, because we would push each other to teach a different subject every night, which is just another form of improvisation. If you're okay, I'm going to teach odd times in the way that I do it, in the way that I think about it, or whatever it might be, the subject of the day. And I've never taught it before, so trying to come up with, in the moment, a way to make it clear, a way to have sort of an arc to the lesson even, was really cool to see. And I feel like that tour, at least for me, was a really important experience for just cutting my teeth as an educator. And being around you guys and learning from you not only drum-related stuff, but how you guys teach and present and communicate and even just carry yourself in front of a crowd. I feel like now when I look back, it's funny, I watched those, I did a blog about that at the time. I watched those and I was like, wow, I was a kid. And, when I watch it now, I'm like, they were adults and I was a kid. And you guys are very patient for I don't know, treating me as an equal, I feel like. But it was really formative for me in a lot of ways, personally as well as drum-wise. So what a good time. What a good time.
That's cool. Yeah, man, it was really fun to push ourselves to each teach a new topic every night so that we didn't get bored with hearing the same things night after night. So I don't think there was ever, maybe in different legs of the tour, but over time, but I don't think within one tour any of us did the same thing, after we did it once. I don't think we repeated anything.
Yeah, so. I think you're right. And then this brings us beautifully to a little piece of audio I want to play, because the next big sort of chapter in the relationship was I had the incredible opportunity to sub for you with Periphery very briefly when something came up for you that you needed to handle. And this gives me a great opportunity to play my favorite Periphery song. So if you by an off chance aren't familiar with Matt and his band Periphery, they have, Periphery, what just came out, 5, right?
Yeah.
A bunch of great albums out. They're an incredible band. The music is, my own personal take on the band is like part of your genius and presumably your success is this mix of complexity that is like deep. You can dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the intricacy, and it keeps getting more interesting, mixed with accessibility, right? So I'm going to play a section right now, which is one of my favorite sections of Periphery song. This is my favorite part to play when I played a set of your music and to listen to. And you can hear exactly this. You hear this like totally singable, beautiful melody on top, but then you pay attention to specifically in this case, the rhythmic action that's happening underneath. And it is just like, there's so much going on. So this is, let me pull it up here. This is the outro of The Way the News Goes. I'll just play a few seconds so we can get an idea of what Matt does in case you're not familiar. It's so good. Okay, anyway, so that's my favorite Periphery song. Tee us up. What are a couple of your? I have two things. What's your favorite Periphery song to listen to as a listener, and what's your favorite Periphery song that you're most proud of having played on?
Man, that's really tough. That's a good one, actually. And it's funny, I haven't listened to that in so long, so it's kind of awkward, like hearing it and being like, "Oh, that's a good song."
Yeah.
I feel so funny, but there's some really cool parts on that particular record, which that song's off P3, that I'm very proud of. But I think probably something off the newest album, maybe. There's a song called Dracul Gras, which might be one of my favorite ones to play. I actually have a playthrough of that one that came out a few months ago, so people can check that out if they want.
On YouTube.
And then, yes, on YouTube. And then there's another song off that record, which is one of my favorite ones I'd say to listen to, called Thanks Nobuo, which is the last song on our newest record, which just has it similar to The Way the News Goes, which is a song you just played. It kind of runs the gamut of different styles. It goes from heavy to really kind of fun and playful to really emotional to this big epic outro with like orchestral stuff happening. So it's just kind of all over the place. But I think that, like you said, there's always this unique, I don't know if it's going to make sense, but harmonic duality happening between all the instruments, the vocals, the drums, and somehow it all works together, even though it is busy. So yeah, it's cool stuff to be a part of and to get to contribute to as a musician.
Yeah, it's really brilliant. If you haven't checked out Periphery, definitely do. And you won't need to try hard to pay attention to Matt's drumming, but it sits in there. It sits in there beautifully in a way that I'll put it this way: the drumming is complex, but it's serving the music. And you said to me when we were making the chorus, I think, or when we were speaking recently, you're basically doing the least complex thing that is required to like complement this complex music. Right? So you're not drumming, creating intricate parts for the sake of them being intricate. You're playing the music and doing what the music needs. It happens to be complex. And I wonder, as a listener to music outside of the band, what type of stuff do you tend to listen to? And is that part of the influence when you're in Periphery? How does that influence Periphery?
Sure. I mean, there's been times, of course, in my musical journey as a listener too, where like I've certainly immersed myself in the style of music that Periphery plays. Funny enough, I was a fan of the early demo material that Misha, our guitar player, was writing before there was ever even a thought of being in Periphery, which there was no thought of ever being in Periphery. You know, it was not on my radar. It's just, I like this really crazy, cool, progressive, heavy music. So I've certainly spent a lot of time developing my ear for that style that we now play. But no, I mean, I listen to all sorts of different music, and I'm a big fan of simplistic music. I mean, I go in these stages, but it's funny, lately I've been really into, I guess I would call it like an extension of country, but more authentic, like Western style country. There's a couple artists that I've been really, really, really like immersing myself in. And if you listen to that style of music, it's certainly not about the drumming by any means, but it's about the song, and therefore whatever percussion or drumming is involved in each song is there for a very particular reason, I think, to support the melodies and the story that's being told. So even when I'm not listening to music for the purpose of like studying drumming, which I previously did, I still pay attention very much so to like, why is the drummer doing what they're doing, and how does it work within the context of this particular song. And if anybody's interested, there's two artists that I've really been immersing myself in lately. One is Sturgill Simpson, and then the other is this guy named Coulter Wall. And really interesting stuff, but it might not be for everybody, But for me, it's all about the storytelling. It's all about the vibe that's created. And man, it's just, I've been like completely immersed as of late
Cool.
in these two particular artists. So yeah.
Cool. Well, that tees us up perfectly too to jump into the course. So the course we made, the Creative Grooves of Matt Halpern. It was really fun to sit down, kind of interview style, and do it. But it's really Matt doing all the teaching and taking the lead. I'm there to just kind of bounce ideas off of. The first lesson in that, which is live right now on the website, and then consecutive lessons come out every 2 weeks. There are 5 lessons. The first one is creating a journey with the hi-hat. And you do a beautiful job demonstrating in that lesson what you're describing, even in as a listener, of creating a journey and doing what sort of like making moves based on your musical intuition and what needs to happen to the energy of the song, for example, as opposed to thinking, what's a cool thing I could do now? And I have a clip that I want to play that demonstrates this really nicely. So let me just play it and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So paying attention to the hi-hat, your kick, you're just boom, bah, 4 on the floor with the backbeat. The hi-hat's doing all the creative work. So like, what's going on there? What are you thinking as you're playing? What are you demonstrating in this moment, actually?
Yeah, so I'm demonstrating that you can sort of help a part of a song develop simply by elaborating a bit more on the hi-hat, by changing the dynamics, by adding a few more hits, and building the intensity with just that part of the kit to help dovetail into a new section of a song. And I think in that part of the course, I was talking about a song that I actually recorded with a friend of mine that was, that was the part that I played, and that was the approach. Was there needs to be a very consistent backbeat and pulse going between the kick and the snare, but I wanted to sort of create this movement and develop the intensity of the verse, which is what I was playing there, into the chorus using just the hi-hat accents, sort of in this like call and response way where you're obviously not hearing the music in that clip, but there's vocals that are being sung and I'm sort of responding to them by building from one phrase to the next phrase to the next phrase leading into the chorus, and just using the hi-hat as the mechanism to do that.
Yeah, and the hi-hat is unique in that regard. We talk about that in this lesson, that the hi-hat really has its own special powers on the kit to affect the groove in ways that are really profound. And one of the things I love about the course and your teaching and your drumming in general is that it's really generalizable, like to all genres, right? So this isn't a learn to drum like the progressive metal drummer Matt Halpern in Periphery. This is learn to think creatively on the kit. Learn no matter what you play. Like in this session, you were saying you're playing more of like a pop rock thing of some sort, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, it's like folk rock.
Yeah, that's great. And so for those of us that only know you as the drummer for Periphery, what other projects do you find yourself doing that have nothing to do with that or are really similar to that even?
I don't do many. I have a side project with the singer of Periphery, which is more of like a, I guess, dramatic rock, or almost like, I don't know what the word is, or
Like
it's
more
very
theatrical?
performative. Yeah, I think it's more theatrical rock, which is cool. But I've over the years I've done a lot of different session work, everything from pop music to folk music to country stuff. And typically just working with friends of mine that I've played music with for years and years and years, and still enjoy those opportunities to go in and play music that is not what I play every gig with my band. I even welcome opportunities to play with friends live where I'm just going and playing cover songs. So I'm just a fan of music, and I don't consider myself to be a metal drummer or a progressive metal drummer because of the band. I'm just a drummer, and I can find myself enjoying the opportunity to play many different styles.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other things that this clip demonstrates, and this lesson, and actually the whole course demonstrates really well, is there's sort of a false distinction I think people have sometimes in their mind when they're not comfortable improvising, that you either have groove, you're playing a groove, or you're improvising. And improvising means like rolling around the toms and sort of chopping out on the kit. But what I was just sort of realizing as I was walking to my space this morning was like I think everything that we talk about in this course, which is focused on creativity on the drum set, improvisation, is all groove based. So in the clip that you're playing right there, you are improvising, but all the creative energy is directed at the hi-hat, and you're using different tones, different subdivisions, playing different melodies, different, the hi-hat's opening as it goes to build intensity. So it's important to sort of do away with that distinction and realize that improvisation is something you're constantly doing as you play the drums, and it can be in the most small and subtle way. If you're playing just a rock groove and you want to add a little doom, like that little right?
Yep.
That was a moment of creativity that you just injected into the song.
Yep.
So I'm curious, when you receive, and actually this is one of the questions that we got from students. We went out to students of my website and just online on social media and got questions. And this one was, let me find it. From John Heim. He's a JP Bouvet method student. What does the process look like for receiving a musical idea and then finding the perfect part with it? And what role does improvisation play in that process?
Yeah. Improvisation plays a huge role, but it's not the first thing that I go to. When I get new music that I need to sort of study and develop a foundation for on the drums, and I think we talk about this in the course, I try my best not to get too caught up in what the drum parts could be, and more so I focus my ear on the music, and I let the melodies that are occurring within the context of the song dictate what needs to be played. Kind of like what we were talking about before. Even if it's a complex part, I let the melodies and I let the rhythms that are present in the guitars, the vocals, if there are vocals at that point, in the other instruments, dictate where I need to sit in terms of the rates that I'm playing, the types of parts that I'm playing. And typically I will try my best to be able to internalize and memorize the melodic aspects of the part to where I can sing it back, like actually hum it or sing it back in some way. Because then it means that I have actually internalized the most important part of the song. And then I can begin to sit down on the drums and improvise within the confines of that melody or those melodic parts that are there, so that I'm not going too far away from it. I'm not playing too simply within it. I'm trying to match the intensity, the rhythmic aspects, the melodic aspects with what I have heard and what I think is appropriate, I guess, if that makes sense. So another way to say that is I try not to focus too much on coming up with cool drum parts. I try to listen to the music and let the music sort of be the deciding factor of what is appropriate to play and what is not appropriate to play. And then within that context, I can explore different areas of improvisation. And maybe it is improvising on the hi-hat. Maybe it is something that we, changing the grooves around, changing the backbeats like we discussed in the course, getting a little bit more busy with certain parts of the track, whatever it may be. It's very improvisational, but again, in the confines of some kind of limitation that the song creates.
Yeah. How important are constraints in this way to your improvisation? And now let's leave like the context of music. Let's say you're playing the drums, and like you do in many places in the course, actually at the beginning of every lesson, we start by you improvising with the focus of the lesson in mind. So the first one's creating a journey with a hi-hat. The second lesson is improvising with kick and snare underneath a time-keeping hi-hat. So now the hi-hat's doing nothing but being a metronome, and the kick and snare working. So we basically, in each lesson, are changing the constraints, and they're really tight constraints, really, as we move through it. So when you're improvising, are you thinking of constraints specifically, or what role do those play?
Yeah, I mean, they help a ton. I don't know where I heard this before. I don't think I came up with it, so I can't take credit for this idea. But if you didn't have constraints, it would be as if like you're an artist trying to paint a picture with a gigantic canvas and every color and type of painting utensil possible, and you have no idea what you want to paint or what you want to create. Whereas if someone says to you, okay, you have this small piece of paper, you can only use 2 colors, and I want you to paint a picture of a dog. It's like, okay, cool. That gives me some really good direction. I'm limited by the colors that I can use, and I'm limited by the size of my palette. But within that context, I can create whatever I want. And by having those sort of constraints, it helps you to hone in on what you can do and what you can let go, which gives your mind a nice little sort of break so that you're not feeling like you have option paralysis with every possibility out there.
Right. And what's so cool is in that scenario, funny enough, I think I said that.
You may have.
I think so in our previous hangs. But what's great is if you say to 100 artists, draw a dog with a pencil, super constrained, you'll get 100 different dogs. Radically different dogs, right? And some people it'll be a realistic depiction of a dog, and some people it'll be, the inner mental life of a dog as it is lost in the woods or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like you can go a billion different ways, all starting with that impetus, right? The constraint.
Yes.
So as you're moving through, playing a bunch of great solos throughout this course, one way to listen to the music and to try to get in Matt's head and be in the driver's seat in a way that is instructive is to go, what are the constraints right now? Oh, something changed. Did the constraints change? And you might find that, for example, if we think about actually lesson 4, different types of backbeats, you might find like, okay, the backbeat is now just got established. Before there was no backbeat. It was like improv with the hi-hat timekeeper. Now there's a backbeat that's a change in constraints. There's a new rule that Matt is now following that he set for himself creatively. And then who knows, maybe it switches to a halftime backbeat. You're like, okay, the rule changed again, the constraints have changed. And as the constraints change, that's almost, as the listener, that's kind of like what helps you follow what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so creatively it's useful, but also for the listener, if there's no constraints, what would that even mean? You know what I mean? Like it would be just random out of time playing. Like even the fact that it's at a tempo is a constraint in a way.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of hard to avoid constraints in a way, but I guess identifying it as such makes it more, we can act on it a little more usefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you embrace it that way, you find that it's very helpful.
Yeah. And actually the last lesson of the 5 lessons is creativity on a small kit. Yeah. So Matt is famous for many things, but one of them is doing really intricate and, more importantly, musically interesting and engaging drumming on a small kit. Just, no rack toms, maybe one cymbal, floor tom, snare kick, hi-hat. Right? So bare bones setup. And there are some videos of you on YouTube that have many views of you just like playing on this tiny kit and people just like gathering around and just having a party with it, and you delivering the music and the party. And then you also, if I'm not mistaken, toured with Periphery for some period of time with that super limited kit too, And that's, I mean, in a physical sense, a really obvious constraint. But why do that? First question. And like, how does it affect your playing?
Well, that's one of the big and very easy constraints that drummers can take advantage of if they're one looking to start practicing this way, where like they have limitations. A very literal one that quite literally limits what you can do is to change your drum setup, to take things away specifically, because then you don't have things in front of you that you could previously use. Now they're not there, so you have to be more creative with what is in front of you. And I always liked that idea. It really, funny enough, it came from, like for me personally, using that with Periphery. It was just, I was doing a lot of cover gigs around the time that I joined Periphery, and I was using a small kit all the time to play live. And I was in these small little, venues, bars, whatever it may be, and I, couldn't use a bigger kit. So I just used a small kit. And when I would practice the Periphery stuff, I was practicing it on a very small kit. So I just learned it that way. And then I decided that it was also much more convenient from a logistical standpoint to bring a small kit on tour as a drummer that was also drum teching for myself. It was easier to set up, break down, get on and off stage quick, which all the other bands that we were opening for, I'm sure, appreciated. I know I always do. So it was a very practical thing at the time. But yeah, I mean, on top of that, if you are unsure initially where to start with how to limit yourself for the purpose of improvisation, a very easy thing that you can do is just figure out what is the most minimal version of your drum set that you feel comfortable with at first. For me, I always like kick, snare, hi-hat. But you could do kick, snare, hi-hat, floor tom, or add one cymbal, or just do the snare drum, or just do kick and snare. I mean, there's any variation you want, but I would recommend, if you haven't explored that in the context of creativity, it's worth doing. Because the things that you learn on a small kit will certainly translate as you bring in more pieces to utilize, because you start looking at them differently. It's like, oh, this isn't just a splash cymbal that I can hit this way. Oh, here's a splash cymbal, but I can experiment with it and use the instrument itself in a bunch of different ways. And that comes from being forced to try to find new, different ways and sounds to get out of the smaller version of your drum kit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I feel like the reduced kit will also really expose like where you're lacking creative options, right? So like you mentioned earlier, like the melody of the song is the most important thing. And as you're playing drums, you mentioned in the chorus that you're sort of like letting your musical intuition is sort of like letting a melody or a song unfold, and you're like delivering it on the kit. So you're limited with a limited drum set. If you are limited melodically of what rhythms you are comfortable playing or what patterns you're comfortable playing on the kit, I think you'll probably really feel that very quickly. Because if you have 50 bells and whistles, it's kind of easy to hide behind the variety of sound without having much variety of sort of underlying content, if you will. And what's so great about, again, sort of the clips, I'm thinking like the second lesson's improvising kick and snare underneath a hi-hat timekeeper. So kick and snare are improvising together, limited kit, just kick, hat, and snare, and hi-hat's doing a metronome. And what's so remarkable about it is how engaging it is the whole time. And one thing you talk about, I think in the course, but also I remember from our common thread days of teaching together, at least I think, is where you'll treat one instrument as a kick, hat, snare. So if you're playing the hi-hat, you'll go just within the hi-hat, you have a little drum set. You can do soft like fat sounds, big sounds, and you can find like a little dinky sound that's ding, 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 and that's the hi-hat of the hi-hat. So you can create grooves with just one instrument, and you do this super well. But when you then sort of multiply that by 3, so you're like, okay, the kick drum can play its own, has all these dimensions. The snare drum has crazy dimensions. The hi-hat has maybe even more dimensions because it's so versatile. And then you're combining all that together, and now we're thinking like, wow, like whatever. Suddenly, instead of seeing, a really constrained kit, the options start to really multiply with what you could possibly do. Because when you think
Yeah.
of a kick drum melody, that kick drum melody can be played on any of the three instruments, in kick drum mode, if you want to put it that way. Um, but one of a bunch of ways to sort of change your perspective about your limitations to get more juice out of the vocabulary that you already have.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need a drum set to be able to emulate a drum set. You could on a desk like the one I'm sitting on, you could create a sound that sounds like a bass drum just with your hand. And then you could create a different sound by just changing the position of your hand that sounds more like a snare drum when you put those together in contrast, Same instrument, just different ways to use dynamics and sort of placement of your hits to create different sounds. And yeah, that's the idea. And it becomes much more obvious, meaning that idea becomes much more obvious and easier to explore with less in front of you, with less drums. So it's something that I talk about quite a bit. People ask me a lot about like, how do I develop my like ghost note control, or like the dynamic level that is required for playing intricate linear parts or like ghost notes in the context of a big groove. And so much of what I talk about is like, well, if you can create different dynamics on one surface with one limb, then you can start to understand that you have a lot of ability and freedom to create sort of drum set style rhythms with very little, so that when you do actually have more, as you said, it is quite multiplied and the possibilities become much more endless. And then you start to become this very dynamic drummer who is able to use different dynamic sounds, but also be versatile and comfortable on different setups. And you kind of are able to be a chameleon in that way, which is always something that I think, again, practically is great as a working drummer. Is like, you should never be in a position where it's like, oh, I can't play this drum set or that drum set because it's not comfortable for me. Well, I think that's actually a kind of a bad limitation that you set for yourself. You should be able to look at any drum set and say, all right, yeah, it's not my drum set, but like I can still make noise with this and I can still have fun with this and explore it. And that comes from putting yourself in these situations where you have a different setup and you're not comfortable with it, and you just explore what's possible. So
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound I don't know what the word is. I guess my point is, it's like, I would encourage any drummer who wants to be a professional working drummer to explore different setups and different tunings and different styles, because there are going to be times when you're not on your own kit and you have to perform at the level that you would if you were on your own kit. And you don't want something like a uncomfortable drum set to get in the way of your ability to perform. So a good way to navigate that is to put yourself naturally in uncomfortable setups or things that you're not used to, and explore that. So hopefully that makes sense.
I'm into that.
Trying to help with that tip. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Let's pivot to another question that came from a student, Zach Derringer, another student from my website, who we do progress posts. So students upload a post to them at the end of every chapter working on stuff. I send a video with personalized feedback. We've been going back and forth about movement on the kit. And he says, basically, he's like, I've been trying to get more movement out of him because, as you always demonstrate and discuss so beautifully, it will affect the sound of his playing. So the question here, and let me just word it as it's supposed to be worded here, what role does motion play in your creativity on the drums?
I think it's everything, right? Like drumming, when you're playing drums, motion, I would argue that drummers are the most mobile performers in the way that we have to move to play our instrument, and a lot of times we have to move quite drastically in certain ways, whether it's speed or the direction we're going with our limbs around a kit. But I think from a creative standpoint, you use motion to create texture and to create dynamic range, right? Like the more motion that you use, the more dynamic range you have. And that can be very beneficial in certain contexts of music that you're playing. The less motion that we use, the less dynamic range that we have to work with, which can also be extremely useful based on the context of the music. And the more we experiment with movement with the sticks and our hands and creating limitations, like we talked about with certain ranges of dynamics, the more experienced and the more comfortable we'll get with knowing, based on whatever song we're playing or whatever musical context we're trying to perform within, what is appropriate to use dynamically. But on top of that, or separate from that, then there's this other type of movement, which is the movement of our bodies, which we talk about in the course, but which can create your own version of a metronome that is like an internal and sort of external example of a metronome, whether it's you're bobbing your head or you're moving back and forth or you're bouncing in your seat, or you're being really stiff because the part requires a more stiff approach to the sound that you're trying to create. Motion creates sound on the kit, and the types of motion and the types of sound that we create sort of are very tweakable, right? And I think so. I think it's everything. Like if I want to play very, very quiet and very, very rigid for some purpose, I would tighten up and limit my motion. If I want to play really big and really loose, I'm going to open up and I'm going to, use this type of motion, and then everything in between. So I don't even think it applies to only creativity. It's at the core of everything we do on the drum set.
Yeah, and I recently did a drum camp, and I found it interesting. I've encountered this before, but that the movement, the metronome movement, is hard. So there's a kind of like, what is it? Rub your tummy, pat your head thing going on. Yeah. There's a coordination thing going on where we were doing some melodies that switched to the upbeat, and I wanted people to feel the quarter note. And I said, nod your head, go down, 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 up, up, up. And you realize that when people say like getting the music in your bones, stuff like that, that sort of cliche stuff, that there's an obvious and profound truth to that. That is like, as your body starts to correlate with downbeat, upbeat is literally going up, and when you're swaying back and forth on the kit in whatever, and everyone's way of doing this is going to be idiosyncratic, but if you're swaying back and forth on the kit, you're not playing quarter notes the whole time, right? You're playing stuff that detaches from that, but your body, literally in your bones, is keeping time to help you, so you don't have to think about it. So you don't have to be like counting and confusing yourself. So I find it really worth emphasizing what you just said, just to put an exclamation point after it, that internalization of the time, being able to groove with it is really big. And you've talked about at clinics we've done in the past, when you walk, right, paying attention to the metronome of your steps and like thinking melodies as you do it, thinking rhythms, thinking about upbeats, thinking about groups of three, thinking about whatever it is you think about. And this isn't just some cute arbitrary thing that you should do just for fun because you're a drummer. This is training your body to feel time, and it's the same time in the same body that you're going to feel when you're sitting at the drum set and trying to play those same melodies you were singing. So cool. And I mean, you see this so clearly in your playing that big fluid motions lead to big fluid sounds, right? And small, tight motions lead to a change in sound. So this actually tees us up beautifully for a question that we got from Instagram from Florian Steger, is how do you play loud and stay relaxed? And my addition to his question is there any specific things you're sort of tracking as you play that are like relax-related things?
Breathing is definitely one of those things, and trying to not tense up unnecessarily. But again, using the right type of motion will allow you to play with more power and more volume than using strength, right? And I see a lot of people confuse this. They think that in order to hit hard, they actually have to like put a lot of muscle into it. Yeah, and that's not the case. And there's a lot of times when I'm teaching where I give an example of this where, I basically, I raise my arm up like this and I tense it up using all the muscle I can, and I come down and I smack my leg, and it sounds like this, right? Like if I'm really tense, it sounds like that. But if I loosen up and just let the weight of my arm fall naturally, it sounds like this. There's a big dynamic difference there, and I'm not using any effort on the second one.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers the question in that, it's all about how you learn to use your body and use the end of the lever, I guess is a great way to describe it. So right now I don't have a drumstick in my hand, so my hand and my fingers are the end of the lever. And I have to figure out how to make it so loose that the motion and the force that I'm sort of creating once I hit the drum is based off of a natural response, a whip, as opposed to a rigid response. It's not the same at all. Mm-hmm. You're actually, and I tell people this all the time, you're going to hurt yourself if you're playing with too much muscle and too much strength. That's how we end up sort of, things like tendonitis, like that's how we get that, because we're tensing up as we create impact, and all the force that we're creating goes right back into you, and it can cause damage. Versus when we're loose and we pull back, the energy is fluid and it transfers so much better into the drum and then out in terms of the sound too, and doesn't go back into your body in a way that is aggressively damaging your joints. Yeah. It's very important to work on this stuff. And I think just a good way to do that and to think about that, going back to this idea of walking, is think about how you walk down the street. I would hope that you're not walking using all this muscle, being extremely tense all the time. If you did, you would be very rigid and you would hurt yourself over time by just simply walking, and how your arms sway and how your legs sway and how your neck moves and all that stuff. And, you want to be like how your clothing is, or if you have longer hair, how your hair is when you walk. It just moves. It moves freely. There's no strength or muscle needed to create whatever movement is there. So like when we walk down the street, if you pay attention to that, you'll realize, I'm walking at a pace, but my body is very loose naturally, and my arms are swinging naturally. And so figuring out how to apply that to the drum kit is how you can use that quite literally, and I guess just to further that slightly is like, think about what happens when you walk softly versus think about what happens if you stomp your feet when you walk, or you run faster, or you walk slower. Pay attention to your body and see where you're tensing up, if you're tensing up, and again, have that same sort of approach and concept when sitting down on the drum set, because that'll help with that topic for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to pivot to a question. It's a question from me. These are my questions now, but it's related, I think, to what we're talking about. And I hope I'm not exposing a part of your private life you try to keep separate. But I know you do some Brazilian Jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the first thing about Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, but in my mind, what we're talking about is relevant. So first,
it's the same.
Is it? And second, let's dive further into where's the overlap in the Venn diagram between martial arts, well, specifically BJJ, and drumming?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's the exact same thing. When you watch the most experienced jiu-jitsu players, they are relaxed and loose, and it's very artistic and it's fluid. And they are typically, of course you have people that practice the sport that are very much in shape and very muscular, but you don't need to be in order to be effective. And it's always really interesting and impressive to watch people that you would see on the street not at all think that they may be a lethal martial artist, but when they are practicing jiu-jitsu, they are very, very like their motion and the way they use their bodies is extremely effective and technically sound while being relaxed and loose and not really breathing heavy and all the things that we just talked about for the drums. It's very much the same thing. And I think, although I still very much suck at BJJ, that's one of the things that I tried to apply very early on and understood early on, when I heard it from my coaches and instructors. They were talking about this and it was like, oh yeah, I teach this too on the drums. I'm going to put this concept into jiu-jitsu. So it's very much the same thing. And then I think the biggest overlap for me that I've found to be, I guess I have a slight advantage, or when I started doing BJJ, a slight advantage was like limb independence, because you're using your limbs in different ways. In certain positions, you might be using your legs to secure an opponent while being more dynamic with your hands and fighting with your hands or using your head or using different parts of your body and vice versa. So having the ability to do one thing with your right leg while you're doing another thing with your left leg and another thing with your right hand and so on and so forth.
And you're flammadiddling them in the head.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it makes a huge difference, and I think there's again, I have some advantages because of my ability to use my limbs in that way on the drums. It's certainly translated over. I think that's probably the biggest. And then I really think all the things that we've talked about, like it's all the same. It's like when I'm practicing jiu-jitsu, I try to set limitations and I try to have a goal of like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? Maybe it's a type of move or it's a type of position, and there's a lot of positional sparring that occurs in the classes that I go to. So rather than it being like what would be called like rolling, where you just it's a match and there's no rules and you and your opponent have not set any limitations, it's kind of open-ended. Like that is great, and you need to do that. And it's like improvising with a wide open palette, which is important to do. Positional sparring is very much, okay, one person is in A position, one person is in B position. They're each going for something. For person A, this is how you win. For person B, this is how you win. Within that, do whatever you want. So it's the same idea of improvising in these different positions with a partner and trying to figure out how to reach the end goal. And I think that is very similar to this idea of improvising. You might not have the gamification of it where you're winning or losing, right? And you're also not getting choked on the drums. But it's the same idea of like the more boundaries you're able to create, then the more, I guess, focused your improvisation can be, which really does help with learning. I think.
I wonder if it's safe to say that like mastering any skill requires strategically moving constraints in order to target the development of the specific skills that you need to do the thing. Something for people to chew on. I don't know.
I think, and I would think it is any skill, but any physical skill for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably a nice refinement. That's very interesting. Man, we're getting close to the hour here, so let me hit you with a lightning round.
Okay.
And we'll start with a question from Theo Grimshaw on Instagram, and then I have a couple.
Okay.
What's your favorite sandwich?
Philly cheesesteak.
Favorite horror movie? You've seen them all.
Hereditary.
Hereditary. Favorite bad horror movie? Like because it's bad.
Because it's bad. Oh man.
Or a movie in general.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer for this one.
That's all right. That's all right.
I'd have to think about it.
Yeah, nice. Pontoon or speedboat?
Oh, pontoon.
For sure. Vacation to the city or to the country?
Country.
Amazing. That's it. So gang, again, in case you want to check out Matt's course. It is the Creative Grooves of Matt Halpern. You can use the code Halpern, Halpern, when you sign up for jpbouvetmethod.com. You'll get access to everything on the website. If you choose annual billing, you'll get $100 off. The annual billing is also already $60 cheaper. So it's a big discount. If you sign up for monthly, you get your first month free. So you can snoop around. The great thing right now about the site is it's still relatively small. I am personally in touch with everyone that signs up. At least I offer. Not everyone takes me up on it. But you get my personal guidance to help you find the right courses, chart a course of study, and you're going to be able to dive into Matt's course as it comes out and future guests as they come out soon after. And that's where we learn how to effortlessly flow on the drums. And Matt's course is an incredibly valuable addition to the site because we get to see what an incredible drummer like Matt Halpern is thinking when he's on the drums and how he's approaching improvisation and creativity on the kit. Matt, any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, I just hope people find the course to be helpful. That's really it.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you for taking the time to make the course with me. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. And have a great day, man. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, you too, bro.